Hello there, I'm Leo Warder for Kit Guru, and this ATX case here is the Aerocool GT-A. If you go to the Aerocool website, you'll find all manner of cases that are called GT. What the A means in this instance, I honestly don't know. GT, they kind of refer to GT touring cars, and if you look at this case, there is indeed a sort of flared wheel arch thing going on, although you have a bit of a stretch, to be honest. I must confess, when I look at it, however, I'm more reminded of something like a Capri Gear, sort of a relatively cheap car for ton-up races from the past. Because if you look, you've got this sort of louvred panel that lifts off, which covers two empty 120mm fan housings. There's this slidey thing here, which you won't quite be able to see, but it's got a SATA connector in there, so you can slide in a drive to dock it, as say the wheel arches, grills here and so on and so forth. Around the front you've got this sort of mesh thing going on where you've got these 3 optical drive bay covers and then 6 frankly cosmetic things, which I must confess I look at and I think, ooh, dust trap, that's going to require a bit of cleaning. But let's face it, youth don't care about cleaning, do they? So I think we can accept from the get-go that this case is aimed at the younger portion of the market, and that's absolutely fine by me. It's a cheap case. Retail price is a penny under £60. If you hunt around on Amazon, you'll find it for just under £52. So blooming cheap. And when you consider you've got the window, all the shininess, as I say, the external dock and such like, and inside there are a few features worthy of note. So let's just pull off the side panels. 2 thumb screws on each. Not captive. And then a bit of a tug and away. Quite a flimsy but reasonably sturdy panel. So although cheap, not actually cheerful or nasty or any of those other words that often go with cheap, which is encouraging. 2 more thumb screws and pull off the other panel. And I'll give you a quick tour of the innards. Now then, the hardware I've put inside this case, we've got an ASRock Z97 killer motherboard, an Intel Core i7-4770K processor. Down the bottom we have a Seasonic Platinum 2 passive fanless power supply, and in the middle we've got a slightly unusual choice of graphics card, which is a Sapphire R9285 Mini ITX graphics card. Which might look peculiar when you consider the obvious amount of space that Aerocool has provided, but I'll come to that in a moment. Other components, we've got some Corsair LP Vengeance memory. There's a hard drive in there, just to show you can indeed put a hard drive in there, in that slidey caddy there. And then up here we have an SSD, a SanDisk as it happens. Now then, why did I choose such a tiddly graphics card for a case that can quite clearly accommodate a proper graphics card? If you look, you'll see we've actually got 3 drive bays here, which are 3.5, 2.5. Take out one of the little flexi caddies, and they are very flexy. And you'll see you can either clip in a 3.5-inch hard drive tool free, or you can mount a 2.5-inch SSD hard drive using 4 screws. So that's those 3 bays there, and then above we have further 3 2.5-inch bays above, and they've chosen to do that quite deliberately, so you have this sort of step going in to create even more space for your graphics card. Above you have 3 optical drive bays with these tool-free, if I can just pull that out, push my fingers inside and pull out one of the blanks. So there we go. So why such a small graphics card when it could clearly accommodate pretty much any graphics card on the market? When I built the system, I initially went for a small Noctua cooler, air cooler, an NH9DL, which is a 90mm fan rather than 120. Fits in beautifully, really tidy. This is not that cooler. Unfortunately, when I loaded the CPU, ran Prime 95 to really stress it unmercifully. The result was the CPU went to 100 degrees before it started throttling. So I thought, right, okie dokie, and I changed the cooler to a Noctua NH-U12S, which is a 120mm cooler, a standard box cooler. Now, it's a decent quality cooler, but in that sense, pretty much any 120mm cooler on the market would do a similar job. And it worked absolutely fine. When the CPU is absolutely thrashed to within an inch of its life, it ran up to 85 Celsius. So a little bit toasty, but then it's a fairly small case, less air, airflow tricky, temperatures tend to rise, but we accept that. The thing is that when you look here, you can see that the tips of the heat pipes are almost flush with the side of the case. Now, the side panel is slightly profiled, there's a little bit of accommodation in it, but it's close. It does go on, it clears the cooler, it's fine. But what it says to me is, you're limited on your CPU cooler. I very much doubt, therefore, you're going to cram in a monster gaming graphics card. You could, it's certainly feasible, it just doesn't seem very likely to me. Oh goodness me, Leo, you're saying to yourself, well, why would you put an air cooler on a 4770K processor, or indeed any high-end processor? Liquid cooling is your man. The thing is, Aerocool doesn't actually refer to liquid cooling in the context of this case. You have front fan mounts, you have top fan mounts, you have a rear fan mount. You can potentially put 5 120 fans in this case. It just doesn't really work that way. The top fan mounts, there's very little space. They're very much for fans and not for a radiator. It's a similar story at the front, and that mount at the rear where, I don't know, I think you might possibly squeeze a 120 in. It's so tight that I really don't think it's going to be a goer, and certainly Aerocool doesn't list it on the specification. If you look inside the case, you'll see that basically the case is pretty much shrunk wrap around the motherboard. The motherboard goes in, it's a regular ATX board, but there's no space around it, and therefore you can put a fan in, but a radiator obviously takes more space. You've got to allow for hoses and so on. So you are not going to use liquid cooling with this case, you're going air-cooled. A 120 cooler goes in, it does a proper job, that's fine. But the result is you are limited, and if you're limited, I don't think you're going to go for a monster gaming graphics card. If on the other hand you spend £25, £30 more, go up to £80 mid-range territory, Aerocool, NZXT, Fantex and all the rest of them, the enthusiast part of the market, then yes, absolutely, you can start stretching your legs when it comes to cooling, gaming and graphics. Let me just pull off the front panel, and it's a bit of a physical job to get this one off. There we go. Okay, with that front panel removed, it's tethered by the wiring to the top. If I just do this and then I remove these clips on this front gauze filter, a little bit fiddly, but it does come off. There we go. And there we go. Goodness me. You know what, I've done this a few times, it doesn't get any easier. Right, and if I turn that so you can just see it, actually I'll pull it around the side of the front panel and I'll turn it. Slightly interesting in that that mesh filter actually has the front fan clipped to it. If you want to put a second fan on, you clip it to the air filter, then you put the air filter in place. I've not actually seen that approach before. I can understand from the manufacturing point of view it's a little easier, but generally of course we actually mount the fans to the case and then we cover them with a filter. Which I must confess I'm a fan of, so to speak, of magnetic filters because they just work so well. And then you put a front cover in place, that's all fine. But in this instance I've gone down a slightly unusual route. Apologies for the noises. The front panel is interesting in that you have two USB 2 ports, one USB 3, headset jacks, power reset buttons, great big chromy power button, very much going back to that for Capri gear kind of look. And then you have two rotary fan controllers, two for the front, two for the top. The rear fan plugs directly to a motherboard header. Now as you see, there's one fan at the front, one spare, and one at the two spaces at the top and no fans, and a spare at the rear. What I'm trying to show you here, having tidied up the cabling a little bit, is if I just pull this out and I'll turn it to show you. These are the headers there for the fan controller. Very oldie worldy, sort of very 1980s kind of plastic stuff. Cheap, not especially pretty, they certainly work. And the thing is, those two rotary fan controllers, the max position is actually quite quiet and the minimum position is nigh on silent. Does a nice job, and if you were to pack in 5 fans in this case, if your concern is that it might be a touch noisy, I really don't think you have to worry about that in this particular instance, which is very pleasing. So overall, we've got here a proper high-end PC built into a cheap case. And you get a reasonable array of features. As I say, the drive bays down here are tool free if you're using 3.5-inch drives. If you're using 2.5s in any of these 6 bays, you're going to screw the things in. If you want to slide an optical drive in, you have here a tool free holder, so you just slide the drive into place and then lock it down. But why happen to put a DVD drive in? Well, actually the explanation is, and I have the DVD drive here, is that while the drive slides home perfectly pleasantly, you can't actually pull off the front panel with the drive in place. I'll just prove myself a liar there, because that's actually a bay where I've put some cabling behind it. You can't, however, easily remove the front panel if you have an optical drive installed. It's a curious thing, but if I show you there, these sorts of pads that these blanks hook into, they lock on to the sides of the bay, on the sides of the drive rather. So when you have a drive in place, you can't pull the front panel off unless you first remove the drive. Not a difficult job. In fact, with the cabling behind there, slightly more awkward than it might be. Aerocool makes the point you don't need to remove the front panel because it's all tool free, and this is true enough. But obviously, if you want to get access to that air filter that you saw in front of the fans, it is necessary to pull off the front panel. So you will first need to remove your optical drive. Slightly annoying, not the end of the world, possibly something to bear in mind. Also worth mentioning is that the bag of accessories, basically a bunch of tool screws, they're arranged in little bags, individual bags, all very neatly. However, they're not labelled, so figuring out what is what, not quite as straightforward as it might be. It's worth mentioning, by the way, that this case is also available in black with red tones rather than this white with blue LED on the fan. But that's obviously a matter of cosmetic taste. So overall, the Aerocool GT-A, it's a cheap case. It has more features than you might expect for a case at this price point. It does a perfectly decent job. Biggest concern is it's relatively slender, therefore putting in a decent cooler on top of your CPU is not as easy as it might be. It is doable, but the biggest limitation for me is that while you can use a proper air cooler, not an enormous air cooler, but you can use a 120 air cooler, you are not going to put liquid cooling in this case, even though you can put up to 5 fans. So very much one for the air-cooled brigade this, not for liquid cooling. Having said that, when you're looking at a case that's priced at nearer £50 than 60, I think we can say that for the younger, maybe slightly poorer end of the enthusiast market, it's certainly a case you should be considering. So this is Leo Waldorf for Kit Guru, and this is the Aerocool GT-A.